Today we are going to be doing an introduction to the research process. We're going to be going through some basic vocabulary and through the various steps of the process. So you can have a better understanding of what you'll need to do to be able to do your research to complete your assignment. The essential question today is, how do I use the research process to locate and evaluate the best information to meet the needs of my assignment? There's a lot of different ways to do that, but we are going to give you a few strategies to help you through this process. First, though, some research vocabulary. First is a LibGuide. A LibGuide is a collection of electronic resources. I've created lots of them for you, and they are available for you to use for any of your assignments. Next is source, which is where you find information, which is different from a resource, which is where you find sources. Some people will use these interchangeably, but I think it helps to kind of keep them separate and to think of sources as where you find that information and resources of where you find your sources. Next is a database. That is a specific kind of resource that is a collection of specialized sources. They're sometimes on a particular theme or subject. For instance, there are history databases or science databases, but it is an excellent place to find a wide variety of specialized sources for you. And you will use keywords to find those sources. They are the specific targeted words about your topic. They are always a good option to have a list, to have different versions, to have synonyms, to try to have as many options as possible that you can really target what you are trying to find, instead of maybe ending up with a lot of things that aren't necessarily what you're trying to find. The next word is periodical, which is any information that's printed on a schedule. There are some different common versions of periodicals, which is a magazine, which is for anyone. It's what you find just at the grocery store. But there's also a journal, which is a periodical for professionals. So what you're going to be looking for in research is trying to find some of those journals, and you're going to be especially good if you find peer-reviewed journals. If something is peer-reviewed, then that means that it has been triple-checked by experts, and it is an especially good source. I want to talk a second about the difference between searching and researching. I think just in our normal life, we have a tendency to kind of use them interchangeably, but I think it's important to show the distinction between the two because there are a lot of big differences between searching and researching. Searching is your basic entry-level information gathering. It's fact-finding or just looking for one particular specific answer that already exists out there. An example of that would be how many houses were sold in Nashville last year. Well, researching is looking deeply and differently for the best possible information. You're not looking for an answer, you're looking for information. So there is no easy answer out there. You create the answer with your project. An example of that would be, how does gentrification impact neighborhoods in Nashville? You can see one, how many houses are sold, is very simple, straightforward, but the other question, how does gentrification impact, is a much bigger question that doesn't have an easy answer. The 3 R's of research is a strategy that I like to use to help people think about their information. It's just 3 words that you can memorize and help you figure out what would maybe be a good source, maybe not be a good source, and just give you something a little more to think about. The first R is recent, which is when was it published. Newer sources are almost always better, and some topics especially go out of date very quickly. Things like the sciences or current events or biographies, especially of living people. You don't want to get left behind, and you don't want to be out of date with your information. The second R is reliable. Who wrote it? What else have they written? Why should you listen to them? Where was it published? Did someone pay for it? If you can't answer any of these questions, if you can't figure out if this is someone you should be listening to, then it's not a good source. You need to sometimes dig around a little. It's completely fine. It's part of the process. Try to figure out if you can trust the person who's doing the information gathering and the writing for you. There's some other words for that are synonyms that you see kind of interchangeably. You could also say credible, reputable, or valid. And the third R is relevant. This is if the entire source and not just one random quote or just one random statement connect to what you're researching. You want to make sure that you are connecting everything into what you were trying to say, but you don't want to take anything out of context. You don't want to be in the position of needing to say, okay, this is what I thought this person was saying, but that's really not what they were saying. You need to be sure that you can justify that it does fit and that you're not putting words into someone's mouth. So I like to use the 3 R's of research, which are recent, reliable, and relevant, just as a little tip to help you as you're looking for your information and to find what you need on the go, and you'll use it for the rest of your life. And once you've started doing your research, the first thing you need, of course, is your topic. Your topic is the general subject of your research. An example of that would be, say, cosmetology. So it's very broad. It has a lot of options, which is why you then need to start thinking about your research question. Your research question is the specific question you're asking and answering with your research. So an example of that would be, how did changing hairstyles reflect changes in society during the 20th century? So whenever you're talking about your research question, you're not just talking about cosmetology as what your paper's about. You're narrowing it down, and you're looking at some specific aspect of the history of cosmetology. And after you have your research question and you start finding some sources, because now you have something to be looking for, then you frame your thesis statement. That is the main idea or argument of your paper or product, and it introduces what you're trying to say. It's usually towards the beginning, either in the first or second paragraph of your paper, and it gets people interested, and it introduces what you're going to be talking about in the rest of your paper. So an example of that, based on the research question that we just chose, would be, throughout the 20th century, popular hairstyles changed dramatically, reflecting bigger changes in the culture of the United States of America. So here you can see that the topic was a broad general subject, but then you narrowed it down with a research question. And then once you started to find some sources, you narrowed it down further to make a statement for your full thesis. Now, the research process seems very complicated, but once you get the hang of it, it's quite easy because you just get used to it. So the first thing you always need to do is make sure you have that topic. So it's either something your teachers assigned to you, or maybe it was something you chose on your own. But once you have that, the next step is always creating that research strategy. This is your keywords. This is where you're going to be looking. This is starting to frame that research question. But maybe you're not ready for that yet. You're starting your strategy and you realize that there's more things you need to learn. So that's when you build your background knowledge. You look in encyclopedias or more general topics and general subjects. So then you can start getting more specific as you go along. But it's fine if you need to go back and do some background knowledge building. That's 100% okay, and it's part of the process. Sometimes you'll find after doing that you need to revise your research strategy. That's fine too. It's completely okay. It's part of the process. Then you form that research question. You have started your research, you've got your strategy written down, you know a little bit of background information, and now you're starting to get more focused. So you form that research question. Once you do that, you start to really hit the research part hard. You start locating that information. You aren't just saying, okay, these are the resources I want to use. Now you start saying, these are the sources I want to use. Once you do that, you then evaluate your information and organize your information. And it's so much easier if you just do this along the way. That's why those arrows go back and forth. That's why a lot of these arrows can go different directions. Because sometimes you're doing a lot of these things at the same time, or you're taking a step back, or you're taking a step forward, and that's completely fine. The research process is much more of a circle or a spiral than it is a straight line. So once you have some of that information and you've evaluated and organized it in a way that's useful to you, you then would write that thesis statement. Because now you have the research question you are answering, but you are starting to say, okay, this is my answer to that question, and that is your thesis statement. Once you do that, you then start to draft your knowledge product, your paper, your presentation, your poster, whatever it is that you're creating. Then you have that time to revise, and you can go back and forth and redraft. Maybe you need to go back and do that thesis statement again. That's fine too. You can do that. Once you get to the end, you publish. So when you are looking at the research process, the important thing to remember is to not get locked in on an idea of what you should be doing every second. Move back and forth, move back around, and do what's best for your research. So what do you do now? Now you're going to start building that research strategy, which is the where and how of your research. You need to start thinking about where you're going to find your information and how you're going to find it, what keywords you're going to use, and what criteria you're going to use to be able to find that research.